And well, the poorly structured plot, incoherent generic storyline, one-dimensional characters, corny acting, tepid direction, dull shooting locations, and cheesy special effects may not be up to the standards of even the least of today's slickly polished big-budget superhero epics, revisiting this often forgotten entry in the mid-1990s B-movie sci-fi action canon confirms that Venom is at least in spots deserving of the overlooked gem status many fans insist. I'm sorry, what? This year? Really? Oh. And so, at last, Venom, a bad and boring movie that could only have been a bad and boring movie, remarkable only for the staggering length of time it's taken to slide all the way out of Sony Pictures' asshole, enduring through multiple regime changes, dozens of stalled-out production attempts, and no less than 3 separate versions of its semi-adjacent Spider-Man franchise without anyone managing to just say, you know, maybe we should pinch this one off and wipe. Indeed, Sony, or rather once powerful producer Avi Arad, has been trying to make Venom since at least the first Spider-Man movie, and probably longer than that, since when Arad originally glommed onto the Spider-Man movie rights back in the bad old days of 90s comics and the worse old days of 90s comic book licensing, when Marvel didn't have Mickey Mouse money to spend, Venom's spiffy-looking Spider-Man but monster design was the only thing guaranteed to move more merch in the mainstream as heavily as Knives for Fistman and Captain Guns and Skulls, despite being one of the most boring bad guys in the Spider-Man canon for the nearly 20 years of existence between his admittedly iconic origin story and a series of radical overhauls in the early 2000s. In fact, Sony and Arad have remained so convinced not just that Venom in movies but a Venom solo movie is still a good idea now as it might have been in 1996 or so, that they were willing to wreck Sam Raimi's plans for Spider-Man 3 and kill Spider-Man 4 completely in order to make it happen, and even today the awkward joint custody arrangement between Disney and Sony over the official Spider-Man movies exists primarily so Sony and Arad can cobble together a pocket universe of dark and gritty Spidey spin-off projects of which Venom was meant to be the centerpiece. So how is it? Well, it's a movie about Venom, a Spider-Man bad guy whose entire gimmick, personality, power set, backstory, and only remotely interesting dynamic exist in reference to Spider-Man that can't feature, involve, mention, or even acknowledge the existence of Spider-Man. There's one word of dialogue, a guy's name, that seems to exist only to be used as a point of connection maybe, and it's impossible to tell whether it was added in or cut down after the fact, in order to retain an R rating for that sweet Deadpool money, but has been released in a PG-13 form anyway, showing all evidence of having been hacked to pieces in the make it less violent sense, and the oh god, we've made a terrible movie, cut it down to as short as it can possibly be sense, and the we changed our minds as to what the story should be a dozen times while making this sense. So, pretty goddamn bad, yeah, but since it is a Venom movie, it's kind of hard to imagine it was ever going to not be bad, because a Venom movie is just a bad idea. And the thing is, watching it, you get the sense that a lot of the people involved understood that fact and are doing whatever they can to wrench parts of the damn thing into fun shape, or at least entertain themselves amid the dreck. Make no mistake, Venom will alternately bore, annoy, and insult the intelligence of most mainstream audiences when it's playing things straight, but it's surprisingly peppered with weird bits of goofball digression and moments so calculated to draw attention to the dumbest parts of its own makeup that you can't help but imagine them coming from anything other than contempt for the material by all involved. And while these are the parts that I assume some fans, the ones that for some reason were anticipating a dead serious Venom movie, will come away being angry about, they were the only times I had any fun and the only spots where the film ends up showing any real originality and justifying its own existence. It's still a dreary slog of a film to suffer through, but at least there are reasons for me to not give it only 1/2 star of a score. I'm gonna give it 1, but we'll talk more after the spoiler break. Anyway, whereas in the comics, Venom is a pair of black Spider-Man pajamas that's actually an alien that gets mad when Spider-Man takes it off, so it becomes black pajamas for a different guy named Eddie and turns him into an evil monster face version of Spider-Man. In this movie, Venom is an alien goo monster who escapes from a science lab in San Francisco where Rez Ahmed's evil tech startup guy is conducting illegal experiments in order to infect the homeless with alien goo monster parasites to make colonization of space happen faster by infecting Tom Hardy as a non-jerky activist journalist version of Eddie from the original Spider-Man comics, which gives him superhuman beating people up and swinging around with strings of goo like Spider-Man powers, and lets him morph into an invincible monster that still looks mostly like a black monster face version of Spider-Man pajamas for no specific explicable reason. And because Eddie is good and Venom is bad, but not as bad relative to Rez Ahmed and the other symbiotes, they team up to stop him. And also them. This is followed mostly by boring scenes where Tom Hardy flails around while pieces of CGI beat up stuntmen for him, a couple scenes where he turns completely into Venom to beat people up that'll have you thinking, hey, I wonder how the Spawn movie holds up today. Bizarre staging and cinematography that conspire to make Georgia playing San Francisco look like it's playing Seattle, and dreary, overloaded, ultimately pointless bad guy exposition. But then every once in a while, Tom Hardy gets to argue with himself in funny ways, or do alien human body physical comedy, or generally make a goofy asshole of himself. And if only for a moment, Venom becomes something like a growly edgelord version of The Mask, which is still bad, but at least better than the rest of it, which will demand a spoiler warning to discuss. Alright, so the main way you can tell that Venom has been hacked to pieces is its bad guy plot, which makes very little sense and gets dumber as the surprises get piled up. The focus keeps cutting back to the evil science lab where minor characters get symbiotes put into them, and staging that feels set up to make fans wonder who's going to be the big bad guy other than Venom to fight. They do tease Carnage in a post-credit scene, and yes, they did manage to rope in an actor who's way too good for this shit. But then there's also this awkwardly edited in subplot where another symbiote is body hopping its way across the world like in The Hidden or something until it can take Rez Ahmed over and make him do the same bad guy plan he was already doing anyway. And then there's a scene where he's all, rah, surprise, I'm an evil goo monster too, to Tom Hardy, and it's staged as though it's supposed to surprise the audience, but we already know because we saw him get taken over, so it feels like that was supposed to be the twist, but then wasn't, and it doesn't matter anyway, whatever. Incidentally, as strange as some of the editing in this review may be, I promise you the editing in Venom is worse. I'm pretty sure at one point Tom Hardy goes into a store in the daytime, then emerges 3 hours later at night for no discernible reason. On the plus side, all of this does end up meaning they have to give Venom himself a reason for not being the same team as the other goo monsters, and what that eventually lands on is that Venom sucks. No, really, that's their new origin story. Venom describes himself as kind of a loser back on his home planet, and being the only one of himself on Earth as opposed to letting his apparently all much bigger, stronger, better armed fellows invade sounds like a better deal to him, so that's why he's gonna be the good guy. Yeah, that's it. That's what they came up with. Which, okay, the big scary monster is actually just some shitty dumbass is certainly one way to handle this kind of thing. At least it's interesting. But then, just as Venom has finally introduced the purpose and stakes for its title character, and you're expecting, oh, okay, I guess this is start of Act 2, now the movie can begin. Instead, it's time to sprint to the climax and fight the other monster because it's the end of the movie. Oh, okay, that's it. Venom is a boring, stupid, ugly-to-look-at movie that only ever becomes interesting when the post-production studio meddling is sloppy enough to be funny, or when you can tell someone said, screw it, Tom, just be weird and twitchy and that'll be something at least. Although the most honest and sincerely heartfelt line of dialogue belongs to Michelle Williams as Eddie's girlfriend, when she's asked at one point to intone with complete and utter sincerity, I'm sorry about Venom. 1 star, me too, Michelle. I'm sorry about Venom too.